What?
Hey
Okay.
everybody, welcome to the Tatiana Show. And this is a very special edition. I'm very excited for our guest today. We have Andreas Antonopoulos, one of my first friends in Bitcoin and also a great mentor or teacher or something or other. I don't know. Great educator about the subject. We also have Josh Scigala, of course, from Voltoro. So welcome, gentlemen, to the show today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me, Tatiana. It's really great to be here.
Same here. Hey Josh, how's it going? Are you psyched?
Oh, I'm psyched. I've never been so excited. It's truly, Andres, when you gave your speech at the Canadian uh, uh, political roundtable regulatory body
Yeah, it was
meeting,
the Senate. Yeah.
the Senate, that's the one. Oh man, I literally, that was every 5 minutes I was just standing up and clapping. Oh, it's just extraordinary. You nailed it, every question so beautifully and so elegantly. Um, that yeah, it was just flowing. And we call this blockchain immutable, and I would say thank God because we have Andreas, who is also immutable in a lot of ways.
Oh, thank you so much. I actually have a great team help me prep for that, and did quite a lot of preparation for that particular talk because it was quite important.
Andreas, a lot of your talks you do sort of off the cuff, or do you come up with I mean, everybody knows that you're, one of the best speakers in the space and always really inspiring. So how do you go about that? Do you have a plan before you start talking, or what you have like an overarching theme, or how does
Yeah,
that go?
I usually have an overarching theme, and in my head I have 3 or 4 bullet points of what I want to say, and the rest is improvisational. It's off the cuff, and it really matters to have an audience so that I can play off the audience and get feedback as to what things they're enjoying and what things they're not. And a lot of the stuff you don't see is that I have a lot of presentations that I do with smaller groups where I get to practice some of my material and try it out and see what they like. So it evolves over time. But yeah, it's really all improvisational.
So where have you been speaking lately, and do you think that the what has changed since the beginning of your time speaking about Bitcoin to now, in your opinion?
Well, the most recent thing is the conference we did together at La BitConf, the Latin America Bitcoin conference in Mexico City, which was quite exciting. That was the last one from 2015. I'm about to go into heavy conference season. I'm planning visits across Europe in March. I'm going to be in Zurich for 2 conferences in March, and I'm also trying to arrange now to hit 3 or 4 other European cities during that tour. So I'm going to be visiting a bunch of local groups and community meetups. After that, I'm heading out to Brazil in April, and it's just nonstop conferences until the end of April.
Is
So
there
it's going
some
to be
way
quite exciting.
people can check for dates and stuff? Do you have a
Yeah,
tour list?
once I have confirmed dates, I post them on my website as well as on Twitter. So there's an events page on my website which I haven't updated because I haven't finalized the details here. But I will be posting a lot of that information this week on my website and also on Twitter.
Have you, one of the things that is really great when you do the speech, and when we were in Latin America, I'm sorry, in Mexico, I guess it's Latin America, you always bring up these key points, which I think speak to the essence of the core of Bitcoin's idealism, right? When you do a talk for bankers, how do you temper that in a way? Or do you like, is that different for them? Do they leave there crying and saying, how are we going to rob people now? How does that go?
Well, it's funny because I don't temper the message. I don't change the message in any way. In fact, if anything, it becomes a bit more pointed. And my approach is to say what I'm going to say and then find the conferences or have the conferences find me that want that message. So recently I did a presentation in London at Wired Money. And the presentation basically consisted of telling them why their attempts to do watered down solutions with distributed ledgers and blockchains were basically bullshit. why identity and KYC and AML are dead ends, and why Bitcoin is going to disrupt them and is the real thing. And their little sideshow of trying to do the blockchain good, Bitcoin bad isn't fooling anyone. They loved it. Most of them loved it, at least. It went down very well. And since then, I've been invited to a bunch of other conferences to repeat that very message. So I think that's the best part of my job. I get paid to tell bankers that their weak tea blockchain bullshit is bullshit, and I really enjoy that.
Wow, it reminds me when sorry, Talia, when I'm at the shopping center with these self-checkout people, and there's one checkout chick left teaching people how to use the self-checkout system, and I always feel slightly sorry for them.
So would you say that the people in the banks are aware that they are basically participating in a system that is fleecing mankind? Is that why they're so responsive? Do you think that they feel like they're doing something wrong? Do they want to do something right? I mean, do you think they have the same frustration that the rest of the population feels?
I think for the most part, you've got to realize that there's a massive difference between individual motivation and institutional action. And what happens is most of these people are really focused on having a job, paying their bills, getting their kids through school, making a living. Banks have been employers for hundreds of thousands of people around the world. They're one of the few parts of employment that is still quite vibrant. They've sucked they've sucked the breath out of every other part of the economy, but that means that the best and brightest are still attracted to banks where they get secure and plentiful employment. So most of the people working there really are just trying to do the best thing they can, and they see what they're doing as serving people's financial needs and serving their customers. Very few people within the banking system really conceive of, are the Wolf of Wall Street greedy stereotypes you see in movies, and I've worked with a lot of bankers, and most of them are not sociopaths. Of course, the sociopaths do end up getting promoted to some of the highest positions within the company. And the problems really are institutional, however. It's the fact that these organizations, having established themselves and aligned themselves with regulators and created cozy relationships with governments that feed these spheres of power and influence back and forth, they're kind of stuck in this rut where what they do is what they do, and the whole thing has its momentum, and individuals really don't matter or change anything. It's the institutions that are the problem, and subverting those institutions is what Bitcoin is all about.
I think really it comes down to also that this marriage between bank and state really is the issue as well. I mean, bank as a general concept is somewhere but you store your money. But when they really get in bed and they start building these regulations around protectionism, crony capitalism, and also bailouts, where you privatize the profits and socialize the problems, that's really where the problem starts. And I think that's something that Bitcoin is really able to suck out, well, at least compete against. So people have the choice to go, hey, well, I can take part in this crony capitalist system the bankers have set up, or I can exit and just do something on the side.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, and that's simply a matter of historical perspective. 500 years ago, banking was a great liberalizing institution that actually opened financial capabilities and services to people who were not part of the royal court. So before you had this type of what we would now call retail banking or consumer banking, only royalty and the royal court had access to the types of financial instruments. They were the banks themselves, effectively. And so the idea of taking banking and turning it into a consumer-oriented or retail business that serves just normal people was a huge liberalizing influence, and it took away a lot of the power of money from kings and royals and aristocrats. But over time, any institution that disrupts the status quo is eventually co-opted and merged and turns into the status quo itself, which is why having disruption in waves and bringing a new wave of disruption every now and then is good for society. So it's just now time to fix banking with something that's absolutely more egalitarian. And who knows, maybe in 100 years we'll be talking about disrupting the ironclad grip of Bitcoin that has become a tool for the 1% with a more liberal system. We don't know how these things play out, but it's ironic to think about the fact that it used to be the case in the 16th century that the only people who had checkbooks were the aristocracy, and banking brought checkbooks to everyone. That's a great liberalizing force. Not anymore. So we fix it.
Let me ask you something. When you talk about the blockchain thing, right? I also find that annoying. However, I've also seen cases made for, banks not being able to have that transparency, not having control over it means that they won't be complying with regulations. So from a real world perspective, they have a difficult time being able to adopt Bitcoin. And then furthermore, okay, well, if they have their private banking system, well, why is that bad? Should they not be able to do that? I mean, obviously, I doubt that they're going to pass the savings on to people, but aside from that, what would be the drawbacks from some of the smaller blockchains?
Well, really, there's no drawback at all. Banks have their own internal systems that are highly centralized, and in those cases, a permissioned or distributed ledger is actually a great improvement over having an institutional clearance house that has control and front runs their friends' trades and plays games of advantage and power with the rest of the market. So a blockchain actually is a better solution. But we've got to realize the limitations these things have, and part of the problem is that a blockchain that doesn't have decentralized proof of work consensus behind it, or some kind of similar consensus algorithm that is decentralized and anonymous, it can be coerced, and it can also be rolled back. So you lose the immutability, you lose the fact that you can't change the blockchain after it's being recorded. You can't roll back 100 blocks and rewrite history. Well, in permissioned ledgers, well, you can, because it's based on signatures, not mining. So that's a disadvantage. It also means there's a lot of other security problems that come with that. Now, is that better than what they currently have, which is highly centralized clearing systems? Probably, yeah. It's going to save them quite a bit of money, and it's going to change the way banking is done internally and make it more efficient. That doesn't change the world. That doesn't change the relationship between banking and state, between currency and people. And Bitcoin does. It doesn't allow you to build an open, decentralized, global, transnational, transparent, permissionless, open innovation platform. And Bitcoin does. So I'm going to stay focused on Bitcoin. That doesn't mean permission blockchains are bad. It just means that they're weak tea compared to the really, really, really disruptive and interesting thing. Just like if you have an intranet where you run your own private mail servers behind firewalls, it's useful. It's great for inside a corporate environment, and you have a wiki, and you can compare internal corporate information and transmit it. Great. But is an intranet ever as interesting as the internet or Wikipedia or any of the open platforms we use? No, it's not. It's never going to be as interesting. It's never going to be as secure. It's never going to be as effective. So I see these private blockchains as intranets, and Bitcoin is the internet, and I'm much more interested in what happens on the internet.
What do you think about some of the other projects, crypto projects like an Ethereum or a Counterparty or something like that? Do you find them as compelling?
Absolutely. I think these are very compelling projects. I look at this as one giant evolutionary space where different species of currencies or blockchains and solutions compete. And I think they will find different environmental niches where they will fit well and provide great solutions for specific problems. Bitcoin provides a very specific solution for the high security global clearing network for high value transactions with very robust proof of work security behind it. Ethereum fits in a different niche. It provides the kind of contract based stuff that perhaps Bitcoin can't do as flexibly because it has to have much more conservative and robust security. And there will be other niches. There's plenty of space for many different species of cryptocurrency to exist. There's lots of little environmental niches where they will fit. I think eventually what we will see is that they will interoperate very cleanly, and we're seeing a lot of work towards that with side chains and various other innovations that allow us to tie these things together and make them collaborate quite nicely. So I don't see any of these as competitive. I see them all as very synergistic. Bitcoin opened the door to a world with many, many currencies, not just national monopolies that have the Queen's face on them. And that world is going to be complex, it's going to be vibrant, and it's going to have a lot of competition.
Do you think, one thing that always was coming up in the early days when there was just Litecoin and Namecoin was and then you'd talk to some of these old gold bugs and they say, well, it's just, it's like poppy fever or whatever it was called. The tulip, sorry,
right.
The tulip. So where it expands not through the one blockchain, but by having hundreds of thousands, if not millions of different blockchains from 21 million tokens, whole tokens, to infinite. But do you think that that changes now? Are we seeing the economic theory evolve?
I don't think it affects the scarcity. The underlying scarcity of each individual currency, I think, provides the right incentives within that system and within that currency. Whether we'll be able to exchange them for each other, et cetera, I don't think this expansion of possibilities or competition among currencies is a bad thing at all. Although we do have to recognize that what we've seen in the past, I think will continue to be a fact, is that you will see a power law distribution of these things. 80 to 90% of the value will be in 1, 2, or 3 at most currencies at the top, and then the rest of it will be shared by 10,000 currencies in a very long tail, many of which will have infinitesimal or marginal or no economic value whatsoever. They'll be used for other purposes, or they'll have sentimental value or popularity value. And that's okay. That you're going to have this long tail distribution, as you have with many things that have a first mover advantage.
I guess it's almost like having keys, where you have hundreds of keys, millions of keys can open certain doors with value behind them, and certain doors with nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
So Andreas, I keep hearing about the block size debate, and I think that a lot of shows have covered this ad nauseum. However, I think of my show as the gateway to regular humans to understand a lot of this Bitcoin stuff, and you're really great at explaining this stuff. So explain to me, who really has a much lesser understanding of the tech, what is all the fuss about, and why is everybody freaking out about Bitcoin? And my current's like, it's dead, because that can be a little bit scary for people that are new to it. So is there kind of a really basic level that you could explain what the debate is about?
I think it's important first to recognize why there is a debate and what it means to be having a debate in an open forum on an open source project and in an open currency and distributed system like this. The truth is that people are not used to this kind of open debate, and the reason they're not used to this kind of open debate is because most of the decisions in other financial systems are made behind closed doors by a small number of people who then just announce their findings as if there was no debate whatsoever. And you get this authoritarian pronouncement, fiat, if you like, that comes from above and is very clean and polished and written by PR professionals. When Janet Yellen makes her Federal Reserve remarks, those are very, very, very carefully rehearsed. Every word has very special meaning. And you don't see a lot of the kind of nastiness that goes on behind the scenes, which may be very heated debate. All of that's hidden. In Bitcoin, all of our laundry is out in the open. You get to not just see the sausage, you see the sausage making process, and it's not very pretty. This is an open, vibrant community with a lot of different opinions, and these opinions don't get to make the other side shut up, and they don't get to impose their opinion on the system because no one has enough control to override everybody and stop the debate. And as a result, because the system cannot be modified with authoritarian control, and because it requires everyone to agree in order to be modified, these debates can rage on for a while until consensus is reached, and they happen in a very public and open manner. And other people will point to this and say, look, Bitcoin's a mess. That's not a mess. That's what an open community looks like. And we've seen this in other open communities. We've seen it in Linux. We've seen it in on the internet in the standards bodies that made decisions about the internet and protocols like TCP/IP. If you want clean and sterile and antiseptic, you elect a dictator, and you will get a nice, clean, PR-proofed decision. We don't have dictators in Bitcoin, so we get the full messiness of democracy. And it's not even a democracy where the majority rules, because it requires a very, very, very high level of consensus before anything happens. So even if half the people or 55% believe something, they still can't make it happen so easily on the network. So that's, first of all, we've got to realize that this messiness is part of what makes Bitcoin great. It's the fact that we're not arriving at any decision is because it's difficult to make changes to Bitcoin without everyone agreeing, and that's one of the most important strengths that keeps Bitcoin from being subverted to political pressure, to majority opinion, to a fad, to a popular sentiment, and switch from one position to another. It means that the principles in Bitcoin get maintained for much longer. So what's happening? I mean, the technical side, sorry, Tatiana, go ahead.
Well, because it just seems like we're barreling off into the abyss, and the way that it's kind of presented, the way that, I'm like absorbing it, is that, Bitcoin's going to fail tomorrow, like this block size thing needs to be solved right now. And I guess you're going to
Bitcoin's been failing tomorrow since 2009. That should be a slogan we should put on the T-shirt, right? Imminent failure. Bitcoin's imminent failure, imminently failing since 2009.
Yeah, I call it the fainting goat of money now.
Right. So the bottom line here is that there's all of this, whoa, it's going to blow up, it's never going to work, Bitcoin is going to die, Bitcoin's dead. Isbitcoindead.com or bitcoinobituaries.com if you want to read about the other 92 times that Bitcoin died, or to check if Bitcoin is currently dead. You can use those two websites. It's quite a lot of fun. Seriously though, Bitcoin is resilient. It's very resilient to all of this drama and all of this fainting and vapors that everybody's getting. The bottom line is that we're having a healthy debate about the future of Bitcoin. This debate is about a very careful balance between preserving the principles of scalability and decentralization. It's about making sure that as we scale Bitcoin to meet more demand, which is really a reflection of success, we have a scaling problem because Bitcoin is growing, and Bitcoin is growing because we're succeeding. We need to meet that demand without changing Bitcoin in such a fundamental way that it breaks the nature of decentralization and concentrates power in any one group. So even the groups that we thought had quite a bit of power, the miners, the core developers, etc., it turns out they don't really have that much power, because if they did, then this debate would have been over. Instead, what we're seeing is a plethora and diversity of opinions arising, and this is not getting easily resolved. However, we're also seeing very specific technical measures. So behind all of this drama, technology is being done, engineering is being done, and this engineering has brought us things like segregated witness, which is a really brilliant scaling solution that at a stroke also solves 3 or 4 very fundamental issues that needed a solution. We're seeing movements towards a carefully planned and executed hard fork that Core is planning. A lot of people will say Core isn't planning a hard fork, but in fact, Core is in the middle of planning a hard fork and very carefully considering the implications of that. And we're seeing these plans unfold. A lot of the drama that happened when Gavin and Mike Hearn introduced XT and then Classic and other things like that has led to a real debate, and we're seeing some real movement in the technology too. So in a way, they succeeded in getting this discussion pushed forward, and we're seeing some real technical solutions coming out. I'm not worried at all. Bitcoin works today. It works perfectly well. A lot of the drama and fainting spells are really a lot of drama over nothing, a storm in a teacup. Nobody's trying to destroy Bitcoin. All of the participants in this debate are doing so in good faith because of what they believe is the best way to move Bitcoin forward, and no one is able to impose their position on anybody else. So, I think we're in really good shape. We're actually seeing some very, very smart scaling solutions for Bitcoin that are going to allow Bitcoin to continue to grow in a way that is effective and safe and consistent. And I think 2016 is going to be a fantastic year for innovation.
I agree. Do you think Bitcoin governance moving forward has do some of the solutions like segregated witness actually allow, because of the scripting being freed up, do you think there's going to be better ways of Bitcoin governance moving forward? For instance, Dash and stuff like that have developed interesting methods for governance and decision making. Do you think that's something that needs to be looked at, or is being part of this technical solution that's being rolled out is going to look at some of these things?
Yes, absolutely. I think we're seeing actually quite amazing developments in the area of governance, both in terms of the human and social aspects of governance. So, for example, the core development team have massively improved in their communications, both tone and content. We've seen the launch of new communication channels like bitcoincore.org. We've seen better communication channels through Slack and the mailing lists, as well as publishing of position points, memos, and FAQs that are geared towards explaining things to the end user, not just in technical terms. And that shows that core developers are understanding the importance of communicating with a broad diversity of users and stakeholders in the Bitcoin space, and not just having the technical engineering discussion. We're seeing also segregated witnesses opening the door, as you said, to some technical governance tools for multiple parallel soft forks and improvements in Bitcoin that can be competitively tested on the network and launched in parallel. That's going to accelerate development and innovation a lot. As for implementing governance techniques, I know, Dash has some interesting ideas. But I think it's important to keep in mind that what can be done on a fairly small scale with non-contentious issues, as is happening in Dash, doesn't necessarily also work at a much bigger scale on a massively bigger network with a lot more money at stake and a very different structure. So it's easy to prototype a solution and then say, look, here it works. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that same solution would work as easily on something as big as Bitcoin. So we have to be a bit cautious. In Greek, we have this expression which is the one standing outside the dance circle always claims to be the best dancer.
Nice. That's me.
So, people sometimes think, well, what if the government makes Bitcoin illegal? And obviously they're kind of not able to do that, but they can make it difficult for people. If the government said, I don't like what Tatiana's saying, they could say, Coinbase, shut her down. And I think that our environment is getting more intense and more government control is being exerted. So other than, I guess, using these more secure wallets, what would you say about people finding solutions to things like that?
Well, I think it's important to remember that government trying to make it difficult for Bitcoin people ignores the possibility that the people who are most to benefit from Bitcoin already have it so difficult that you can't make it more difficult. So if you're a Chinese dissident, or you're an aid worker in Uganda, or you're a Kenyan farmer, or you're someone in Venezuela dealing with a horribly corrupt government and collapsing currency and hyperinflation and capital controls, like, really, what are they going to do? Take away your bank account? Don't have one. I don't have one, so how are you going to take away the bank account I don't have? I'm already in a cash and barter society, can't make it any worse. The real issue here is that Bitcoin is solving problems and will be solving problems and addresses the needs of people who have never had the nice, cozy relationships with banking that we have in the first world. And so therefore making it illegal, everything's illegal in some of these countries. It wouldn't be the first or the last thing to be made illegal. Laughing's illegal too. It doesn't matter. So the point is, in the places where the rule of law matters, it's actually quite hard to make things like Bitcoin illegal. You can run interference, but that really isn't very effective. In places where the rule of law doesn't matter, you can make it illegal all day, and people won't really care if it's made illegal. They'll just use it to bribe the police officers and politicians, as we've seen in the past. So the thing is that there's the other side of this coin, which is that if you try to fight kind of a battle of attrition against Bitcoin by making it harder, by trying to track things, by trying to block things with block lists and blacklists and things like that, what you end up doing is you lead Bitcoin to evolve into becoming stealthier and more anonymous and more fungible than it is today. So every action has an equal and opposite reaction. If you squash Napster, you get BitTorrent. And that evolutionary pressure is very strong. And keep in mind, Bitcoin is one among 1,000 different cryptocurrencies, many of which are much, much more stealthy, much more anonymous, much stronger privacy protections than Bitcoin. And Bitcoin can adopt a lot of those techniques. So in many ways, trying to disrupt Bitcoin may have a kind of opposite effect by leading it to evolve into a stronger system. Anti-fragile systems do that. They respond to stimulus with reaction.
We saw that with Silk Road. It was a pretty tame market, really. It didn't, it had a lot of stuff banned, and it was quite large. It had this network effect, so everyone was going there. As soon as it got shut down, we have some really horrific, awful markets pop up. So I've heard, and so I know what you're saying there. Once you squash something, you get unseen circumstances happening,
of course,
where you start to see the evolution in different directions that you don't want.
And that doesn't mean that governments won't do this. Governments are often very, very short-termist in their thinking, and they will play this game of whack-a-mole, even though each mole they whack creates a mole that's even worse, even stronger, or whatever. They've been doing that in a number of areas over many, many years, whether it's the copyright wars, whether it's file sharing, music and piracy and things like that, whether it's the war on drugs. All of these things where the cure is worse than the actual problem. They will do that, but it won't really matter. It won't have any effect. The whole point of network-centric money, of systems that are dynamic and decentralized, is that applying pressure in one place simply moves the activity to another place. It's not so easy to stop. And so that's the redeeming feature and the strength of Bitcoin.
So Bitcoin is now also the mole of money, folks.
Yeah,
it's a whole lot of different animals, this beast.
So what do you think will happen with, I don't know, with our society as things go forward? We're talking about the Silk Road. Ross is in prison now. Things are sort of unfolding. I mean, do you think that there's going to be, look at the presidential elections here, if anybody even believes in that farce, which I'm not really too sure I do at this point. What do you think how do you think things are going to lay out? Is there a way to kind of help these people that have fallen victim to the government, or these lost causes, or what do you think?
Unfortunately, I think in many cases it takes a very long time for things to change, or to change to the better, and it's frustratingly long. And in the meantime, there's a lot of minor and major injustice that happens at every scale. The world is not a fair place. It's not a just place, and bad things happen. Aaron Schwartz is dead and Dick Cheney is alive. And, if that doesn't make you question the universe and its justice, then what will? So you just have to focus on what's important and what you can control. And what you can control is your own actions and your own choices, and use the life you have and the time you have to work on things that you think are meaningful and will have a long-term impact. I think we are all blessed in a way to be in this space where we can actually apply our smarts and our creativity and our artistic talents on something that we really see can have a long-term impact for justice and freedom in the world. And Bitcoin is one such thing. So it's let's just count ourselves as lucky that we have this focus and purpose in our life. And it's better to focus on that and not worry about the bigger picture because we don't control that.
Definitely, definitely. Well said.
Um, So I recently accepted the position of running Liberty Fest New York in September.
Hmm.
And, I got into Bitcoin because I was so frustrated with the political process. I thought this is just a joke. This is never going to work. And I think that, seeing what's happening this year is obviously supporting that theory. What I wanted to do was focus this Liberty Fest on liberty in the future and freedom in the future through alternate technologies. We've, of course, talked about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies in general and what they can do. Are there any other emerging technologies that you can think of that you're excited about that could help liberate people in the future?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the other thing we have to consider is that we're essentially at the apex of a 25-year war on cryptography that has been waged and raging between various governments in the world and the people of the world who are using encryption and security technology to protect their own privacy and independence and self-determination and freedom of expression. And we've been fighting this for a while. I remember back in the 90s, I joined the EFF in the very early days, and I was participating in many of the activities around the Clipper chip and the ban on encryption that was attempted by the Clinton White House in the very early 90s. And we prevailed in that round, and that's why we have fairly robust cryptography on the internet today. And gradually it's getting better. Bitcoin is actually one of the most widespread systems for public key cryptography in the world we've ever deployed. And by attaching the use of keys to the security of your money, you have a very nice incentive system. But those same keys can be used for communication and authentication and many other things. So I see us as on the cusp of a great revival of cryptography and encryption technology. For the first time in history, individuals have devices on them that are fully encrypted, that even the manufacturers can't open, that use end-to-end encryption technologies for communication, that no one can intercept or surveil. And we're seeing, especially after the revelations by Edward Snowden, a great revival in the interests of privacy and cryptography. I think this is a battle that we can win, and I think the other really great tools for freedom in our lifetime are the use of cryptography for personal privacy and independence. I would
Yeah.
encourage people to investigate those things and to learn how to use cryptographic tools to protect their privacy. We are getting enormous progress in that. Interestingly, Bitcoin has accelerated the rate of research and innovation in that space, again, by tying its financial incentives. We've seen some incredible developments in cryptography because of Bitcoin. One example would be ring signatures and confidential transactions. Um, uh, Gregory Maxwell and Dr. Peter Wool developed, among others, some amazing things happening there. We're seeing a great resurgence of research in homomorphic encryption, which is an incredibly powerful technology and has made enormous progress in the last few years. So I'm quite hopeful that we're going to see some very interesting innovations in cryptography in my lifetime that will significantly change the world.
And for those folks that, say, oh, it's for terrorists and stuff, I mean, the tragic, disgusting terrorist attacks that happened in France, all happened over SMS, unsecured SMSs. I mean, and you can't tell me that those things aren't being watched already. So they didn't even catch them in the daylight. I think people have to realize that catching bad guys should be good old-fashioned police work and not dragnet surveillance over everybody.
Well, I mean, it's more of a matter of practicality. We have not ever been able to design a technology where we can choose that that technology can be used by good guys and not bad guys. And I'm an optimist. I think the good guys outnumber the bad guys by several orders of magnitude. And it's more important to put effective, useful tools in the hands of good people all around the world to help them improve their own lives, improve their own security, improve their own privacy, because those things matter. Those things are fundamental human rights. And worrying about whether technology can also be used by bad guys is not my concern, and is never going to be my concern because it's not important in the big scheme of things. Criminals use cars, they use phones, they use shoes, they drink water. We're not going to fix these things by banning shoes, water, cars, or telephones, and we're not going to fix them by banning encryption or making encryption weaker for the good people who need to use it.
But it would be handy to be able to see if someone doesn't have shoes, then they're obviously a bad guy. I mean, that would be pretty handy, Andreas. I mean,
Right, well, it
I
certainly
think it's
couldn't
pretty,
run away as fast, too, either.
yeah, I mean, it
So,
sounds like a pretty reasonable thing to ban.
well, what would you say to people that would say something like, well, I don't have anything to hide? How do you counter that in a conversation?
Well, I think if you don't have anything to hide, then you are one of the privileged few who live in a place where they have a level of freedom and control and independence that allows them to live their normal life without having anything to hide. And that's because many of the things that happen in your life are not illegal, and because you don't live in an oppressive shithole. But a lot of people do. Billions of people do. Billions of people live in places where, if you're a woman, you can't drive, you can't own property, you can't show an ankle without being arrested by the morality police. You can't speak against the Communist Party of your country without being labeled a dissident, and at best, not be able to get a job, and at worst, being sent to a re-education gulag. Those are realities of our world today. It's comfortable to be in a position where you can say, I have nothing to hide. But I'm not concerned with building technology for people who have nothing interesting to say and therefore don't need free speech, or nothing interesting to think about and therefore don't need freedom of expression. I'm interested in building a world where everyone can say, I have nothing to fear, and not just the people who are the most comfortable.
Here, here.
So, originally I wanted to ask again because this is something that I think reoccurs. I think there's certain aspects of the community that are a little bit depressed because the ideology is seemingly getting lost in the clamor to please the overlords. Is this something that you're concerned about? Do you think that that spirit is still alive and well, or do you think that it's more of an agnostic technology that maybe shouldn't have been infused with that in the first place? What do you think about that?
I think it's absolutely natural in the evolution of a technology as it becomes more and more mainstream that the core principles that birthed it become diluted. That's happened with every technology. And that's happened with the internet, of course. But that doesn't mean that even though the original principles, actually, this week is the 20-year anniversary of John Perry Barlow's Declaration of Independence for Cyberspace. It's a fantastic, monumental occasion. I remember reading that the day it came out. Um, where are we today? Does the internet of today really express the principles and idealism of those early days? The people like John Gilmore and John Perry Barlow and Mitch Kapor and others who founded the FF and many others who were cyberpunks and cypherpunks who built the internet. Does the internet still express their idealism? No, but it did birth Bitcoin, so it's still full of surprises, even though it's diluted and mainstream and Facebookized. It still can birth from within it little surprises like Bitcoin that can shake the world to its foundation. So I'm always hopeful. And Bitcoin is going to get diluted. Its principles are going to get diluted. The good news is that Bitcoin started from a very, very strong ideological position. It created an ecosystem where even stronger ideological positions for freedom and privacy can be expressed. And it lives in an environment where it's actually difficult to change. Part of the reason we're having this block size debate is because a lot of people are very, very cautious about maintaining these basic foundational principles of Bitcoin. They disagree about the how, but they don't disagree about the fact that these are really important principles to maintain. And that's because Bitcoin is hard to change, it gets diluted a lot slower. We're seeing all of these discussions, and everybody's very comfortable with this new fad, blockchain good, Bitcoin bad. It's like, it's a silly little jingle, and that's about the level of seriousness of this discussion. But that hasn't changed Bitcoin. What it's done is it's made a lot of consultants rich, and it's created a lot of consortia. And now we have altcoins that are not just backed by your local pump and dump scammer, but they're backed by a global multinational bank. Oh wait, same thing. Anyway, the bottom line is that all of that hasn't changed Bitcoin fundamentally. It's still just as disruptive. It's still just as much a thorn in the side of those who would try to create monopolistic systems of capture and control. And it still brings with it a really strong promise of freedom. So I'm very optimistic that we will continue to have a great deal of freedom come out of Bitcoin. And when Bitcoin needs to be disrupted, we'll disrupt it with something else.
So I have a question. When I first got into Bitcoin and when I got into politics as well, it's always been really important to me as a musician to use music to be the voice that can't always, be heard because people have different interests. And I think that artists miss out on their opportunity to use that voice to express ideas, and that's that change society. So when I was trying to explain the artist coin concept, which I'm scaling now, and like helping other artists do it the other day with an artist, I always thought I'm going to use this as a chance to talk about Bitcoin and why Bitcoin is so great, why Bitcoin is so revolutionary. But the artist was caught up on the word Bitcoin and he couldn't hear anything else that I was saying. So in the interest of bringing artists into crypto, talking about Bitcoin maybe wasn't the best thing. Do you think that there is an important part that I or others can play in terms of expressing that ideology behind Bitcoin? Or do you think that it's just going to get lost out there? Because on the one hand, there's a desire for mass adoption.
It doesn't matter what you call it, and it doesn't matter if you succumb to the pressure to use the milder versions of the words and say blockchain but mean Bitcoin. It doesn't matter. I clearly remember a time when the internet was a dirty word, and until it became so unavoidably mainstream that nobody could really continue with that discussion. Now people who consider the internet a dirty place full of heathens and perverts are at the fringe of the most fundamentalist religious sects and conservatism, and we ridicule them. But I remember when that position was mainstream, and I think the same thing happens to Bitcoin. It doesn't matter. It doesn't need the brand promoted. The more people you meet who are just normal people who use Bitcoin, and they're a dentist and not a drug dealer, you gradually realize that a lot of this propaganda is wrong. So I'm not really concerned. If you have to call it blockchain, if you have to talk about decentralization instead of putting the focus on Bitcoin, if the banks do permissioned ledgers, what are they doing? They're funding developers and teaching them how to use distributed ledgers. Great. We got them to put millions of dollars to play on our turf. A couple of years ago, we would have considered that a huge marketing coup and a great success. They're training all of these developers. All of these developers are going to do all of their little permission ledgers within the bank, and then they're going to realize and see quite clearly that there's a global ledger out there that's far more interesting. because it cuts across borders and it's not just a closed system for the banks. And they're probably going to take their Christmas bonus from the bank and use it to start a startup that disrupts the bank itself. Bring it on. Go train people in blockchains. Talk about blockchains instead of Bitcoin. I don't think it hurts us one bit.
But what about trying to, I see all these different movements out there, and everybody's like, feel the burn or Donald Trump and all this stuff. So I think that, using the word Bitcoin or not, inserting that ideology into the expression, I think is something that I want to continue to do, and I think is an important role in the world because nobody's talking about that. So that's why I'm averse to not, that's why I wanted to get involved with Bitcoin with my music, was so I could tell people about, the ideas behind it. It's not because I'm such a crypto nerd. I listen to that stuff, I want to kill myself. But I like the idea of getting people to understand this is a state issue. This is the banking system that's really oppressing you. It's not along racial lines as much as it is the power structure. So I
Yeah,
guess
well, I
that's my
mean,
concern.
the people who are ready to hear that message will hear that message and will be open to it. A lot of people are not ready to hear that message. That doesn't mean you stop saying it. It depends on what audience you want to reach and what the purpose of you reaching that audience is. As you can see, I'm not shy at telling people exactly how things are, in my opinion, and doing that with any audience out there. But that necessarily means that a lot of people will tune out and not listen to what I have to say. That's okay too. There's room for lots of different voices in the space, and each person needs to decide what audience they want to address and what their main message is. So, if your main message is freedom and the power of decentralization and bringing down institutional structures of power, great, all power to you. Bring that message to the world.
Yeah, I think that I don't really think I could water it down too much anyway. It's just not really in my character, but I think that people like to have somebody who stands for something. But at the same time, when I think of music, I think of pop music, not because I love Britney Spears, but because I think of popular and trying to move the populace into a certain direction. It's always been something that it was important to me and made me so passionate about this. And that's why I think I get bummed out when I hear about, the bankers and stuff. Individually, I'm sure they're fine, but I certainly didn't get into this in order to help the banks. um,
I've been a geek since before geek was cool, so I don't know anything about populism. I'm used to being the unpopular kid throughout my entire life. It's only recently that being a geek or nerd became popular. This is all new to me. I'm suspicious of populism. Populism is what allows some of our politicians to be parading around celebrating war crimes and torture as exciting things and get applauded by idiots who haven't, thought about this issue for more than a few seconds. Populism in itself is quite dangerous, especially when it's combined with concentrated power. So I'm a bit suspicious of that. But I
Yeah.
understand what you're saying, and you're never going to be popular by talking about things like Bitcoin. So
well,
that's a bit of a conundrum.
But what if you think about, the Beatles and they were popular and Cat Stevens, he was popular. So I guess that's the way that I think of music as being a perfect counter to the propaganda. And that's why I think it's
You've
been
got to
hijacked.
remember the truth of the history, though. The Beatles were widely reviled among conservative groups here in the United States, and at the time you had people like Nixon, for example, who were actively fighting a culture war and built an entire culture war apparatus against exactly that kind of youth movement, and had utter disdain for their long hair and their revolutionary message and their sexualized rock and roll moves, which seems ridiculous to us today. But at the time, the Beatles were not popular universally. They were considered corrupters of youth by a lot of people. I know that sounds really silly today, but that is the truth. So it wasn't all parades and roses.
No,
I want to corrupt them.
all I generally see is this celebration of mediocrity when I think about pop culture currently, and I think something like cryptocurrency and Bitcoin to break that barrier, because it really is the opposite of mediocre. It's amazing.
I
Uh,
disagree. I disagree. I'm sorry. Pop music in my days was controlled by 6 or 7 recording studios that had enormous power and could tell you exactly who the latest pop artist you should follow was. And we had 3 genres of music, maybe 4. And now you have 400 genres of music, hundreds of thousands of artists who have their own platforms to get giant audiences on places like YouTube without any recording studios. And the gatekeepers can still push a lot of empty marketing dolls out there. But music is so much more diverse, so much more interesting, and so much more powerful today, and the artists are much more powerful today than they ever were compared to the studio. So I don't see it as a parade of mediocrity. Parade of mediocrity was when I was growing up in the 1980s. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
And then we didn't have choice. We had radio. We didn't
yeah,
have any
yeah,
of this.
yeah.
Well,
That's true.
there's more choice, but I think it's a lot harder for artists right now to, I mean, this is what I'm trying to solve. It's like, you go on Facebook, get all your fans on Facebook, and then Facebook charges you to reach them. And there are also, like as an artist, you got to work a day job, and then you've got to work at night, and then you've got to be fit, and then you've got to work on your craft, and then you've got a gig. I mean, and now you have to manage your career. So I think that there are more opportunities, and definitely, yeah, that's great. Artists can record at home, they could do different things, but I don't think that we're quite there yet where an artist can create in a way where they're not working themselves like a dog and then burning themselves out. Like I think
No,
that there's still a
without a
way to
doubt.
go.
Yeah, absolutely. It's certainly not there or easy to be that. But I mean I'm just considering that in the past when I was growing up, all of these artists were completely invisible. They had absolutely no way of reaching an audience other than going to a local bar and meeting people in person. So I think things are changing very rapidly, and the internet is part of what's changed that, and it's fantastic. And as we all believe, I think Bitcoin can add even more to that change.
Now, you released a book, Mastering Bitcoin, fantastic volume one. Now you're working on volume two. When's that going to be released? How's that looking? Is it still as crowdsourced? How's the information getting sourced? Is it super technical, or is it for the new guy, girl on the
So,
block?
Mastering Bitcoin, the first edition was published in December of 2014. It's now been just over a year since it's been out. It did very well. The book is for developers, it's for technical people. It explains how Bitcoin works in incredible detail and technical terms. I'm currently working on the second edition. It's not a second volume, it's the second edition of the same book, which means that updating the content, improving the content, as well as adding a lot of new content to it to address many of the new things that have happened, from payment channels and Lightning Network to segregated witness and reusable payment codes, privacy protections, and things like that, as well as some of the behind the scenes technology. So the book is going to have all new content as well as improvements in the old content. I'm expecting to publish it around the summertime. It's going to again be open with an open source license. People will be able to read it and contribute before it's printed. And then once it's printed, it will be free to read and share with others under Creative Commons license, as well as available in print and ebook in booksellers worldwide. So working towards that right now, and I think it will be a nice addition and helping people to understand some of the new technologies that have happened in Bitcoin.
What do you think about a beginner's Bitcoin book? Are there any out there? Can you make one, please? Because I know that you're just bored and waiting around for requests. But I mean, are there any things that you could send people to that are just starting out with Bitcoin?
Well, I have some ideas about that, but I'm not going to talk about them on this show. So stay posted. We'll see.
Okay, good. Well, we're coming up on the hour now, and what else are you up to? Where can people catch up with you? Is there anything else that you wanted to maybe talk about before we go for the day?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be in March. I'm going to be in Zurich, as well as probably 4 other cities in Europe. So I'm going to be doing a little tour in Europe between March 17th and April 1st. And so I'll be making some announcements soon about that. Hopefully, I can meet a lot of the people in various cities in Europe that I haven't visited yet. And it's going to be a busy conference season, so I'm going to be around. I've also been updating my YouTube channel, posting some of the older videos, republishing them under my own channel now. And so if you subscribe to that, you can see both new videos as they're coming out, as well as some of the old videos that I think are well worth watching.
Very cool. And Andreas, what's your website?
My website is antonopoulos.com. My YouTube channel, you can find it very easily. It's AANTONOP, which is also my Twitter handle, and that's what I use to communicate the most.
So we broadcast on liberty.me, but we also broadcast to LTB Network, and we wanted to know if you had a magic word or phrase for us today, for our listeners.
Oh, I don't. Perhaps I came unprepared. I do not have a magic word.
You can just make it up.
Or a phrase.
I know what the phrase is, and you're not going to like it because it'll make you blush, but I'm going to have it anyway. Andreas is awesome. That's the phrase for today. Thank you so much for joining us today. Josh, tell people where to find you.
Well, Voltoro.com or Twitter, at Voltoro. Just Google Joshua Scigala or Voltoro.
Great. So thank you, everyone at Let's Talk Bitcoin for listening in. Thank you to Liberty.me team for helping us put this together. There will be some extra bonus episodes coming up, so I hope you enjoyed this one. Check it out at TatianaMoroz.com or CryptoMediaHub.com if you want to find out more about me. And I'll see you all soon. Peace out. Bye.
Ciao.